So, today we are on stage 3 of the Stages of Faith, which I'll do a little recap on in just a few minutes. Before we do, I want to do a little exercise with you. I'm going to put this over your head, Jim.
Thank you, much obliged.
Some of you may have done one of these before. Take one, pass it down. Likewise with the pens. Take one, pass it down. This is a brief spiritual gift inventory. And if you are joining us on YouTube, you can take this minute to scroll down into the description where I will have this exact thing down there. We're going to take just a couple of minutes here, and what I want you to do is to read what they are and circle what you think you have been given. Now, a spiritual gift, as it says at the top, is an expression of the Holy Spirit in the life of believers, which empowers them to serve the body of Christ, the church. This is a kind of special equipping for service into God's people. And we find these lists throughout the New Testament. I've got those passages in there as well. Each one of these, I like to think of this as when I am... when my spirit is in line with God, I feel these things very strongly. When I'm kind of out there in the wilderness on my own, I don't quite feel these things as strong. So there's kind of a difference in my mind between a spiritual gift and a talent. You know, my ability to play guitar doesn't change depending on where my spiritual life is. My ability to say, teach does. And so that's kind of the way that I wrestle with this in my mind. But let's just take a minute, read through these, circle the ones that you feel that you have or that at least you resonate with. I see most of you seem to be done. So does anybody want to take a second and share what they feel their gifts are, so that we can affirm that you are absolutely 100% true in that?
I'll go. I find it in going through the list here, I feel like I can serve the church in some roles such as administrating and teaching and helping and giving. I don't feel like that I am led to lead in the faith evangelism and shepherding. I don't feel like I'm qualified or led, or I feel inadequate. I don't know, but I would not check those here for myself. I don't feel like that's not who I am. Serving and other capacities, or helping others and doing administrative tasks, I'm willing and happy to do those, however.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's very close to what
Oh yeah?
I have. And surprisingly, I didn't think, since I am a teacher, but I didn't feel like I feel comfortable doing teaching and not religion or what you're doing.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm saying, that like, that teaching is something that's a job that you do, but it's not necessarily a spiritual gift that you have as something that you can use to bless the church. Or maybe it is, and you just haven't expressed it yet.
Do your spiritual gifts change as you progress through the stages of faith? Or can they change?
Paul says to pray for all of them. That just go ahead and aim for the stars. Like, especially the ones that are, he says, the greater gifts. But I don't agree with him that there are greater gifts. I think Paul just preferred the ones that were loud and boisterous like him. So yeah, I think the Spirit can manifest in different ways in your life. What are you thinking about? Are you feeling like some are in different stages?
Definitely changing.
Yeah.
My gifts are changing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I can be specific because it's still evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually was thinking about you while preparing this lesson today. I'm glad you're here. I'll tell you later when we get there. Not to put you on the spot or anything. Are there any gifts in here that you feel you have that you feel you have never expressed in church? I'll give you an example. I know personally some people in this church body who have the gift of faith, which a lot of people are surprised to learn that there is a gift of faith. It seems like everyone has faith, right? If you're here, then you have faith. But for certain people, God gives them a special kind of faith that comes easy. That just seems natural to them. They don't struggle with faith. I envy those people. That's not my spiritual gift. My spiritual journey has been a lot rockier through these stages. And so I know a lot of these people, and a lot of these people feel like unqualified to do anything because for them, this just all seems so easy. And so they keep their faith private to themselves instead of finding ways to encourage other people. And that doesn't have to be in a formal post, as a Sunday school teacher or something like that, but in terms of being intentional about conversations you have with people after church, asking people more pointed questions, inviting people out to coffee or to come over to your house or go on a walk together. It might mean doing visitations or sending cards or something like that. When you have a gift of faith, one of the things that I think God calls you to do is to use that strength to strengthen others, because not everyone has it. And I think we assume that because we've lived with these gifts that everyone does. But everyone doesn't. And I think that God gives you a specific gift for the purpose of serving the body of Christ, whether that's in a formal role, informal, relationally, any way that might look. So I want you to think on these things, pray on these things, look through these lists, think of the ways that you have plugged in, and think of the ways that maybe you can start dreaming about plugging in. Because stage 3, the productive life, is where we are today. And this is the stage where I think a lot of longtime church-going Christian folk plant their tent. This is where we build our house in stage 3. Just to recap, in these generalized stages of faith, we begin with a simple recognition of God, a simple puppy dog love kind of faith that doesn't need to be examined, a faith that is felt, that is experienced, that doesn't require any organization, any group, any names. It's just this feeling. Moving into stage 2, in which we join a group, we find our identity within that group. We find a grounding, a depth to our faith expression. We tend to absorb things like a sponge. We want to learn, we want to take, we want to be refilled on Sundays is a word that I hear used a lot, that this is my refueling station on my way out to the world. There's a lot of receiving in stage 2. And then when we have received enough that we start to feel confident in ourselves, we start to see ourselves not as somebody in dire need who requires constantly to be poured into, but somebody then who has kind of enough. Not forever, but enough to start giving back. The attention changes from being about me to being about we, about out to the group. And this is a good time to stop and remind ourselves that the stages of this journey of faith are fluid. They are not so clearly defined in real life as we have them set down here. We tend to move back and forth from day to day, and maybe in all 3 of the stages we've described simultaneously. But there may be, in the stages mentioned, one that seems to fit best and most realistic for you now, at this point in your life. One that you keep returning to for its closeness to your heart. Keep that stage in mind as we continue to describe the rest of this journey. And that comes directly from this book, which we're drawing these stages from. So you may be from day to day, you may be expressing pieces of all of these. But if you think about it, that there's maybe one of these stages where you feel most at home, kind of your home base. You may kind of move throughout, but one feels stronger than the others. I think a lot of people end up in stage 3 and we end up staying there for a very long time. This is a comfortable, a fulfilling place. This is a good place to be. This is a very mature place to be. A place in which we feel like we've made it. We've accomplished some amount of spiritual maturity, a certain sense of place, of belonging to a group, of knowing who we are. We feel comfortable enough in our own skin to know our giftedness and to give back to the community. And in many ways, it starts to feel good because you're kind of working for your keep at this point. I mean, we teach over and over and over again, especially in the Protestant church, that you cannot earn your salvation, right? We cannot work out our salvation. We know that. Salvation is by grace alone. But it feels kind of good to help out a little bit, doesn't it? To feel like you're at least doing something for God. Not that God needs your help at all. I heard an excellent description, by the way, from this spiritual author, mystic, and translator of the mystics named Mirabai Starr on a podcast called Unknowing, which is a great podcast. She was paraphrasing something from a 15th century mystic, St. John of the Cross, from his book, The Dark Night of the Soul. He says that God is like an artist, the greatest artist, a painter beyond all others, that everything that God paints is gorgeous, and it's beautiful, and world-renowned. And God met you, and God looked at you and said, "Be still, my heart, this is the perfect subject. I love this subject. I want to paint you." And so you, wow, God chose me. God thinks that I'm beautiful. God wants to paint me. God wants to create an artwork out of me. Absolutely. And so you sit down for the painting and you pose and you hold your pose while God does all of the painting work. And it's great and it feels good for a while, but then you start to feel like, well, I feel like I should be helping. I feel like I should be doing something more than just sitting here. Here, my beloved is over here painting this gorgeous picture, and I feel like I'm just sitting here. And so you start to fidget, and then you start to think, you know what? Maybe I'll do this pose instead. Or maybe I'll do this pose. You know what? God, let me go change outfits. I think I have a better outfit. And at first God is like, this is fun, sort of co-creating with you. But maybe you just stop for a little while. Let me do the painting. I don't need you to do anything. You are my beloved. I am your beloved. Let me work and create this piece of artwork. And it becomes one of the major practices of spirituality to learn how to let God work on you without your help. I thought it was a beautiful image that helped me to realize that God doesn't need me to do this work. The author of the book, The Cloud of Unknowing, which we'll get to later, says that our job is not to fix up the house of our soul, not to do all of the interior work, but to allow God to do it and just watch the door and make sure no one comes in and no flies come buzzing through the windows. Just keep guard of the door of what you're letting in and let God do everything else. But in this stage, we tend to start to feel like we need to do something. And some of that's good, some of that's great. God has an active mission in the world. And some of us decide to lead in conventional ways. We realize that our time has come and we volunteer for committees or consistory, which, by the way, we need folks to volunteer for consistory. So if you're feeling led right now, let me know. Some of you get voluntold that you're going to do something in the church, which is a great word that Bonnie Beard just said to me. She gets voluntold. Because other people see the maturity in you that you don't quite believe in yourself yet. But that it's there. So that people tend to get stuck here. And when you get stuck here in an unhealthy way, what we start to see is burnout, first and foremost. There's some resentment involved about working and never getting a relief and not getting appreciated and not getting supported. And the work that you did initially out of joy, out of giving back to the community that you love, becomes a chore, becomes something you feel you have to do. You start to resent it. There can also be a certain self-centeredness, the sentiment that no one can do this without me. Of course I'm going to be on consistory again, because this place will fall apart without me. Not that that applies to anyone in this room, though. Also, this can lead to a feeling that you need to keep performing, where you feel like you can't do it anymore, but you also feel like if you admit that and you step back, everyone will see how weak you are. And you're in positions of leadership now, and you can't express that kind of weakness, that kind of doubt, that kind of burnout. People depend on you, so you have to keep going and going and going, and then you end up just faking it. Every single time that you're here, you fake it, and it kills you a little bit more inside to be inauthentic in that way. Stuckness at stage 3 generally comes with a deep and frightening longing, I have found. A feeling that we just can't muscle through it anymore. When our old answers and old ways of doing things aren't working anymore, and we don't know what to do. Sometimes this is precipitated by a crisis or some kind of change in life, maybe a global pandemic, I don't know. But there's a certain fear in the sort of stage between 3 and 4. When you feel like you're moving towards something, but you don't know what it is. It's dark and frightening. This is the worst, by the way, moving from this safe and rewarding stage of doing and belonging into something dark and threatening and unknown. Stage 4 is what St. John of the Cross calls the dark night of the soul. It's a time of unknowing, a time of reckoning. And so the ways that we can get unstuck out of 3 and move into this stage is first and foremost by recognizing that this stage is not a bad thing. Deconstruction, taking things apart, maybe stepping back from things is not a bad thing. Feeling like your faith has fallen apart, that you don't know God, you don't feel God, you don't understand God, you don't know if you believe that God is real, all of those things, that's not a step backwards, that's a step forwards. That's a step into honesty, into a radical vulnerability, into moving into a frightening darkness. That's a good thing. So first and foremost, when you're stuck here, you're feeling resentment, you're feeling burnout, you're feeling kind of prickliness, leaning into the fact that you're not backsliding, but you're moving forward. It also is important to know that you do not need to be a pillar for other people. People who depend on your steadfastness will appreciate more your honesty and your vulnerability. You need to learn to accept uncertainty, to embrace unknowing. It can be helpful to talk to a pastor or a spiritual advisor or a trusted friend who's been through similar stages before, because stage 4 is where souls are forged. It's a sign of maturity and growth to enter into it. So have grace with yourself. And sometimes it's helpful to find a friend in the process. Next week, we're going to get into what this looks like, this dark night of the soul, this undoing, unknowing, and how to navigate these crises of faith in order to come out on the other side stronger and deeper and wiser and better, more full of joy. But that's not until next week. So we're going to rewind a little bit and think a little bit more about this stage when we are productive, when we're doing, when we're feeling fulfilled in our role, our individual role in the church. Are there any, I'll stop for a second, are there any questions or points that you want to say, something that's bubbling to the surface?
Some of your descriptions of what's going on in stage 2 and stage 3 remind me of the potential stages or involvement in a business career. You go into a stage 2 and you're into a group and you're learning how the group functions and whatever, and after a period of time you're no longer a newbie, you're you're in the group and you're ready to be productive. So you go on to productive and you become a low-level supervisor, and then a superintendent over long, maybe a manager or whatever. And at some stage in there, you burn out. The hours are too much, the frustrations, whatever, many things can make you burn out. But I don't see a corollary to stage 4 from that business environment as we have here. It's there, the stage 4 is to quit and go into something different so that you can start something new and fresh. And maybe that is what you're saying about stage 4. It's a new journey, and you'd have to take a leap of faith, no pun intended really, to go into something different and see what happens. And it's scary and it might be dark, but it gets you out of stage 3. I don't know, that's that was a corollary I came with as you talked.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In like business and work and everything, there's like systems in place to move you through those stages. In faith, you're just kind of handed it. And if you would like to progress through stages, you can. If you'd like to get stuck in, the equivalent of a minimum wage job, or an entry-level job, you can. So then this feels like realizing that you only became a doctor to make your father happy, and you never actually loved it, and you wanted to be an author the whole time. And so now you're taking this leap of faith to try this new thing, leaning into the fact that this never made you happy, or maybe it did, but for a season, and I think our souls are our souls, regardless of if we're in church or somewhere else. So that makes sense to me. Anyone else? Any questions? Any thoughts bubbling to the surface?
Just to add to what you and Sam were saying, I'm studying for clinical counseling to become a therapist, and it's funny to see the ties between the psychological development between people and these spiritual journeys and with business. It just seems like, I guess we could give it credit to God that things kind of grow this way naturally. Like these stages are just like, they're different words, different phrases, different scenarios, but they seem to run parallel in a lot of ways, and it's really cool to see and just have a different way of seeing it, framing it, and getting a grasp on it. I think that's really cool that there's this way of seeing it too. It's just it's not a surprise, but it's refreshing to see it just portrayed in different ways.
Yeah. Everything is spiritual to some extent. So if you're in stage 3, the stage of doing, of kind of earning your keep, of being busy, of helping, of teaching, of finding your place within a church community, within the kingdom of God, you would think that the spiritual practice that I would give to you today would be one of doing. Perhaps some kind of charity work or volunteer work, or even an active spiritual practice like walking a prayer labyrinth. But I would encourage those of you who are here in the doing stage to practice a spiritual discipline that is the exact opposite. That is the opposite of doing. Because your inclination is to always want to be doing something, to do more, to do more, to do more, to earn your place in the church and in God's favor. And we tend, when we're stuck in this stage, to go towards pride. So we want to develop a spiritual practice that keeps us humble, and that keeps us grounded, and that keeps us still. So for that reason, the best spiritual practice is simply doing nothing. Because action must be powered by spiritual fuel, or it leads to burnout. And so I want to take, with the time we have left, to do a brief introduction to the ancient practice of contemplative prayer. You actually see contemplative prayer in almost every spiritual tradition in some way, shape, or form. In the Christian tradition, typically the mystics, the monks, the sort of out on the fringes of Christianity, this has been a major spiritual practice. My kind of favorite period of theology comes out of the medieval period in Europe with the mystics that came out during the times of the Crusades and the bubonic plague and all of the awful things that were happening all throughout Europe. These mystics popped up and looked inward and found God in the stillness and in the darkness. Contemplative prayer is simply the naked intent of love towards God. The naked intent of love towards God. It doesn't rely on language. This isn't a way of praying rote prayers. This isn't relying on feelings, on actions, on doings. In fact, you cannot comprehend God with your intellect. Kind of like rule number one of contemplative prayer. If you sit and you imagine God, if you think about all the characteristics of God, if you try to imagine God, you have instantly made God into something else. You have created an idol, which for many purposes is fine because we're limited in how we can understand things. But the purpose of contemplative prayer is to try to transcend that. There is a medieval text called The Cloud of Unknowing, which is this sort of handbook for contemplative prayer. It was written by a priest who wanted to remain anonymous and did a really good job of it. A lot of this book is about humility and centering on God, so it makes sense that it's anonymous. There is a translation that came out in 2009 called The Cloud of Unknowing, a new translation, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's written in very easy to understand vernacular. I found it to be beautiful and helpful. The basis of it is this. While we are in these mortal bodies with these brains and these souls that are, these spirits that we are, there will always be a cloud of unknowing between us and God. We will never be able to see God in God's fullness, experience God in God's fullness. There will always be something lost in translation. And this author refers to this as the cloud of unknowing that stands between us and God. And it is our job in contemplative prayer to thrust our spear of love into that cloud and demand that we receive glimmers of light through it. To acknowledge at the beginning that you will not get through it, but to try anyway. To take our naked intent to love God and to thrust into that. And so we find a place, we find a comfortable place in which we're not fidgeting too much, and we try to quiet our minds. And we focus on simply our love. And thoughts will intrude, because of course they will. And when they intrude, you look at the thought, you acknowledge the thought. You recognize the fact that you have now acknowledged the thought. You have now thought about the thought, which means you have control over the thought. And then you put the thought under the cloud of forgetfulness. And you continue to thrust into the cloud of unknowing, taking every thought that comes and putting it under the cloud of forgetting, and moving back into the cloud of unknowing. The author says that this is strange and difficult to those who are just starting, and it can seem like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so for those who are just beginning, it can be helpful to pray a word. No more than one word, though. Because you don't need to convince God of your worthiness in this prayer. He uses the example of a man who is drowning in the sea. A man who is drowning and sees a ship would not try to convince the people on the ship that he is worth saving, or explain to them that I am tired, my arms are failing, I'm going under the water, I'm drowning, I'm afraid that I'm going to drown, I have 3 kids at home. Like, nobody does that. When you are in your most dire moment in the water, everything that you are feeling, everything that you are experiencing, everything that you are, your hopes and dreams for the future, your fears of the present, everything gets all put into one help. And that one word expresses every single thing that's happening inside of you. And the person listening to it understands. And even if that person were your mortal enemy, they would be compelled to help. And how much more then is the God who loves you compelled to respond as well? And so he suggests for those who are just starting to use a simple word, a single word. Maybe that word is God. Maybe that word is life, or grace, Jesus, now. Whatever that word is, it is not the focus of your attention. You are not supposed to say the word and then think about what it means. You're not supposed to say, grace. I need grace. I don't offer grace to others, but I want God to offer grace to me. How can I offer grace to others? None of that. Save that for later. During the time of contemplative prayer, you're allowing everything that you are to move into that simple word. This is a lifelong practice. You start with a minute a day. You move to 2 minutes a day. You move to 5 minutes a day. You make it up to 10 minutes a day. If you are able to engage in contemplative prayer for 12 minutes a day, science has shown that it will have a positive effect on your mental well-being. 12 minutes a day is the minimum amount for it to have positive neurological effect. I think positive spiritual effect, you're good with any amount of time. But if you want to have better mood, better memory, all those things, studies have shown mindfulness meditation, or what we call here contemplative prayer, you need 12 minutes a day for it to have a big effect. So, yeah.
You just used a term that's been of interest to me.
Mindfulness?
No, meditation.
Ah, yes.
How do you distinguish between what you're talking about here, contemplative prayer, and meditation?
Meditation's a broader category that stretches across all kinds of religious and non-religious traditions.
Right.
There's a million different kinds of meditation.
So you're saying this is one of the characteristics within that
Contemplative prayer is a kind of meditation.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it a lot.
Yeah, just like breath prayers are a kind of meditation, or the Hindu, I forget the prayer,
Yeah.
That's a kind of meditation. Contemplative prayer is a Christian kind of meditation in which the point is to simply direct your intention towards God and then allow God to speak to your soul in a way that can only be experienced and not understood. So I want to take a minute. This is obviously a crash course into something that takes a lifetime to master. But if it feels like something that's compelling to you, I would invite you to check out The Cloud of Unknowing, especially this translation, so accessible. It was originally written by a priest to one of his students, a 26-year-old student. And so it's written like a series of letters. And so this author, I think, really helped. It's written in Middle English, so some of the translations can be a bit lofty. This one I found really good. I actually just reread it and finished it 2 days ago. Highlighted half the book. But he'll give you all kinds of ways of wisdom in how to grow in this way. So let's take.
Who's the author of that translation? Would you?
Oh,
recommend?
Carmen Butcher. It is called Cloud of Unknowing, a New Translation. I think it was translated in 2009, and that's the first one since the early 1900s. So we're going to briefly try this, okay? We're going to take 2 minutes. And Matt, this will be your homework.
Okay.
You have to do this at home now.
That's okay. I'll probably watch the tail end of the video in a couple of days anyway.
Okay, so 2 minutes, and I'll keep time. No need to worry about that. I want you to sit in silence. I want you to simply incline your heart towards God. Feel the desire towards your beloved. If you must, find a single word and pray it with every inhale in your mind, but don't dissect it. When a thought comes into your mind, acknowledge it, give it space, recognize you have power over it, move it under the cloud of forgetting, and move on. The fact that you have intrusive thoughts is not a failure. The fact that you recognize intrusive thoughts is a success. That is growth, to recognize thoughts. So let's take 2 minutes now. And that's 2 minutes. So you can do that. You can start there. The author of The Cloud of Unknowing says that there there's an active life and a contemplative life. And there's lower and higher stages of both. But the higher stage of the active life and the lower stage of the contemplative life are the same thing. And that a person needs to reach into the depths of the contemplative life in order to find the strength, fuel to live in the upper stages of the active life. And so I pray that you are able to take that to heart and find some fuel, some spiritual energy to propel you through that active life. Go in peace.
Thank you very much.